In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Gracious Lord, we praise and thank you for the gift of life and for newness of life in Christ Jesus. We thank you for the gift of our faith and for the way that faith has these many years grown and flourished, been challenged, and then flourished more here in Western New York. And we thank you especially today, Lord, for the great man whose memory and legacy we honor, John Timon, the first of the bishops sent here to serve the people of this area. And in fact, Lord, to begin to found what is now the Diocese of Buffalo. We're grateful for all of those who have come to join us today, and we pray that our own faith as Christians and as members of the church, and for many of us, maybe most members of this diocese, that we will be refreshed and strengthened in hope, in joy, and in gratitude by our time together. And this we pray through Christ our Lord. Amen. We held a few months ago, actually in the spring, a day of reflection for all of our staff at the Catholic Center. We've been doing that now the past 2 or 3 years. We close the Catholic Center down for the whole day and bring all of the staff here to Christ the King. And we have a theme for the day and then different breakout sessions and prayer and all. And what we did this past spring was a short version of what we're doing today. And Dr. Castillo Dennis did a magnificent job with all of my staff. We had everybody there. We have 140 people who work in the Catholic Center. And of all, the ministry personnel, and then all the people who take care of the related areas, all the financial and real estate and the secretaries and the groundskeepers, everyone came, and for everyone, it was a remarkable moment in their sense of this local church to which we belong. Going back to 1847, when the diocese was founded, and, along with several other dioceses. The Pope was very, very busy founding dioceses back then. So I was delighted when the possibility came up of this afternoon, this symposium we're having. And with Dennis and Paul, who are scholars really in Timon, and representatives of ministries that John Timon began, and which continue to flourish now, remarkably, here as well. So I welcome and thank all of those who will present, and all of you as well. Thank you so much. May it be a time for all of us of a growth and deepening of our own faith. Thank you, and now I'll introduce Dr. Dennis Castillo, who will kick things off.
Actually, an interesting debate might be what's the greater challenge, establishing all these agencies as the founding bishop, or the efforts to try to maintain them as the 14th bishop. So certainly maintaining and also adding in other ministries that need to be covered. Our first presentation will be on the life of John Timon before he came to Buffalo, which will be presented by Dr. Paul Lubienecki. Dr. Lubienecki received his PhD in history from Case Western University in 2013. Much of his research has been in the area of the Catholic labor movement, including the work of Father John Bolin and the Diocesan Labor College of Buffalo. Dr. Lubienecki has done a good deal of work on Bishop Timon as well. In 2010, he published an article in the New York History Review entitled John Timon, Buffalo's First Bishop, His Forgotten Struggle to Assimilate Catholics in Western New York. Earlier this year, at the American Catholic Historical Conference, he presented a paper entitled Solidifying an American Catholic Presence, John Timon's Missionary Work in Texas and the Mississippi Valley.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is great, seeing this size crowd here for today. This year is the 150th anniversary of two important men who have left their mark on Western New York. One of them is Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the 150th anniversary of his birth. And Wright, you know, from the Darwin Martin House, Gray Cliff, and the demolished Larkin Administration Building. This is also the 150th anniversary of the death of Bishop John Timon. His legacy is far more important, far more significant to us than probably Wright's. Yet we know Wright better than we know Timon. My talk is to give you a little bit of who John Timon is, really, in his time before he became Bishop of Buffalo. Hopefully this is enlightening, because very few of us really know who John Timon is and the importance he had here in Western New York. Now, Timon was born February 12th, 1797 in Conowingo, Pennsylvania, which is just down the road from Gettysburg, PA, and just up the road from Emmitsburg, Maryland. He often said, and with much pride, that I was conceived in Ireland and born in America, which was literally true. The family came over, the 7 of them came over to America. When John Timon was 3 years old, the family relocated to Baltimore, Maryland. His dad, and this is probably where John Timon picked up his business acumen. His dad was a merchant, operated a dry goods store, did various trading in dry goods. After a few years' time, John Timon decided that he was going to enter St. Mary's College in Baltimore as a day student, just to get the feel for academics, which he found was quite to his liking. However, due to economic circumstances in the country, the family moved in 1818 to Louisville, Kentucky, where James Timon, John's father, tried to continue running a dry goods store. That failed, so a year later, in 1819, the family moved to the St. Louis, Missouri area. As early as 1822, John Timon was considering priesthood. He had been thinking about it most of his young adult life. He entered the seminary to study for the Diocese of St. Louis. Now, at that time, the Vincentians already had a presence in Perrysville, Missouri, just upriver from St. Louis, and their seminary was nicknamed the Barons. So John Timon took courses there while living at the bishop's residence. After about a year of that, John Timon decided and had discerned that the Spirit was calling him to become a Vincentian, so he entered the novitiate for the Vincentians. As a novice studying for the Congregation of the Mission for the Vincentians, this was an extremely active, hectic time for him. The Mississippi Valley, and we are looking at southeast Illinois, Missouri, northern Arkansas, was mission territory. Pretty hostile to Catholics. That area consisted mainly of Protestants, wealthy Protestant merchants, farmers, tradesmen. So being a Catholic meant that you were a foreigner holding allegiance to the Pope, so you're not exactly welcomed. Well, as a novice, John Timon and his fellow Vincentians would travel up and down the river to teach, to find Catholics, to preach to them, and to minister to the poor. And that's one of the charisms of a Vincentian. Timon was ordained. Tomorrow will be his anniversary, September 23rd, 1825. As soon as he was ordained, he was appointed to the seminary. Now, the Vincentians are, one of their main charisms is education, training future priests. At the same time now, the Vincentians are opening the Barons as also a 4-year college. So John Timon's assigned to teach at the seminary and at the college, where he's teaching science, English, and business, because it's already seen that he has a great business acumen. He picked this up from his father. He knows finances. He knows business organization. So for the next few years, John Timon is wearing many hats. He is teaching at the seminary. He's teaching at the college. He becomes rector of the seminary, and all this while traveling by foot 10, 12, 15 miles to the various parishes up and down the Mississippi Valley. It's here that he is bringing back Catholics to the faith, converting Catholics. One of his biographers has said very fondly of him that John Timon converted more people and brought more people back to the Catholic faith than any other priest did in the Diocese of St. Louis. By 1835, John Timon is a well-known name in the Midwest and the Mississippi. They've seen all the great things he has done to reinvigorate the Vincentians, to bring them to some sort of financial security and stability. So Timon's name is starting to pop up left and right now to be a bishop, or at least the equivalent of an auxiliary bishop in different places. People want him in St. Louis, in Vincennes, Indiana, even there's talk about New York. Well, the Vincentians, who are headquartered in Paris, get wind of this, and they don't want to lose this valuable son of St. Vincent. So they decide to create, for the first time, the American province. And this province would be semi-autonomous, and John Timon would run the province. And this is a title he held from 1835 until 1847, until he becomes Bishop of Buffalo. Timon seems to be ready-made for this position. His ability to handle finances, to fundraise, made for the job. He has business administration skills, organizational skills. He gets the Vincentians onto a good, steady, right track. But he's also very pastoral. If you were to ask John Timon, what is your main purpose, what do you relish the most as being a priest, he would say, being a parish priest. And he visited parishes up and down the Mississippi River, walking to these places. Now, as provincial superior, he let it be known to candidates for the priesthood with the Vincentians that I'm the model you need to follow. Now, John Timon is sort of a type A personality, and not exactly the most humble of people, but that's okay. He writes a book which is supposed to be the unofficial history of the Vincentians in America, called the Memoirs, the Baron's Memoirs. Turns out to be semi-autobiographical. The book that's here on the side is the History of the Missions of Western New York, another semi-autobiographical work, but that's fine because it gives you a better insight into who John Timon is. During his tenure, the first 2 years, 1837 and 1838, he makes several trips to Europe, and this is going to be a hallmark of John Timon's activity, even when he comes to Buffalo. He goes to Europe, he makes connections, he is fundraising, because for John Timon, his biggest concern is that you need to have educated clergy and educated laity. That comes from schools, high schools, elementary schools, colleges. So he wants all this here in America. It's over in Europe, but he wants it here for Americans. So he does pretty well as a fundraiser. 1836 proves to be kind of a pivotal year in American history. The Republic of Texas is declared, and about a year later, in 1837, there's a lot of Americans who are living in Texas who petition the American hierarchy that we need English-speaking Catholic clergy here to take care of the Catholics in Texas. And there's a long political story about all of this going on because Texas is still under the canonical jurisdiction of Monterrey, Mexico. So what do you do? So they offer it to John Timon and say, would you go on a fact-finding mission to Texas? And he agrees to do so, and he loves it. So late 1838 and then well into 1839, he and a couple of his Vincentian colleagues traveled to Texas. He goes to Galveston, Texas, and he's thrilled to be able to perform marriages, baptisms. But what he finds is Catholics lack basic knowledge of their faith. He finds this disturbing. He finds it disturbing that there are a lot of priests who are not well trained, who are not doing ministerial processing as they should be, as they were trained. So Timon realizes that Texas is ripe for evangelization. And he writes this magnificent report and says, we need to get funds for Texas, and we need to get a bishop in place. He's not looking to become bishop, he's just saying this is what we need. Well, turns out that Rome already had its sights set on John Timon. They named him as prefect apostolic, which basically he's in charge of Texas now. And he holds this title for a couple of years, from 1839 to 1841. And during this time, he wants Texas to become Catholic again. But he's also fighting a lot of the bigotry that's going on. It is Anglo-English speaking Catholics who are saying, all these other priests, they aren't doing what they should be doing for us. But Timon's trips to Texas have shown that this isn't true, that Texas is a really cosmopolitan mix of people. He's encountering Spanish, Mexicans, French Canadians, immigrants from Germany, Poland, Ireland, Scandinavia, and he realizes that this is fruitful territory. So he looks to get priests to come into Texas. And he's working on this, and he seems to do a fairly decent enough job. However, wherever he encounters priests that he finds are doing immoral things, bad things, he throws them out. Timon has no problem getting rid of a priest. He'd rather have an abandoned parish than a bad parish. There were even times where he was getting word filtering back to him that other dioceses were sending their problem priests to Texas. Timon talked to a couple of bishops, and that stopped. That never happened again. One of the main concerns, though, for Timon was church property in Texas. Because of the situation with Mexico and Mexican politics and now the new Republic of Texas, church property was sort of in a nebulous area. Timon didn't want governments or peoples or states or counties just taking property that was rightfully belonged to the church. Timon, in his political arena, and this is a nice long backstory that I won't get into, actually knew quite a few of the congressmen with the Republic of Texas. And actually, a lot of the congressmen for the Republic of Texas were Catholic or Catholic by birth. A bill was supposed to go through Congress, the Texas Congress. I'm not sure what was going to happen. Timon made sure that Catholic property was returned to Catholics. More importantly, the Alamo, that sacred shrine in Texas, falls back into Texas hands. Timon was a great orator and was well known for his speaking. In fact, he spoke before the Texas Republic Congress. It was widely praised in speeches throughout Texas. There were people who were, and he would invite Protestants. He was a very open-minded person. It wasn't just for Catholics. He wanted everybody to attend his masses or even his public speaking. According to his book, The Baron's Memoirs, there were many people who, after he talked, asked him about instructions into the Catholic faith. But Texas wasn't his only main concern. He is also running the Vincentian province in America. And again, it's a lack of funds, and he's trying to open up hospitals and schools. The issue he runs into is lack of funds, and as much money as he's able to obtain is never enough. He's trying to get different religious orders of sisters to come in to run hospitals and schools, and he's meeting with little success. That might be really the only glaring failure in the life of Timon, that he never got to open the hospitals in Texas that he wanted to. But Timon, and he would say this himself, would prefer to be known as a missionary priest, a priest who has zeal for souls. There are several stories about Timon during his time in the Mississippi Valley in Arkansas. One of them, there was a prisoner who was condemned to death, and this prisoner had asked to talk to a man of the cloth. Timon was called in. Now, the way he had to talk to this prisoner was outdoors and through the bars. And he's talking to him and counseling him about, because this man was to be executed. A crowd had gathered around and were harassing Timon, calling him all kinds of names, vile names. And he made a deal with the Protestant minister who was leading this. He said, I will debate you in public if you let me talk to this man in private. So the next day, Timon has a big debate with this Protestant minister in the town plaza. Now, this is according to Timon. The Protestant minister went on and on and on for 4 hours. It's Timon's turn. He talks for a half an hour. After he talks, the crowd was with Timon. There's another example of Timon talking to, he had known, he was very much into sort of an early ecumenical spirit, so he knew a lot of the preachers, non-denominational preachers and Protestant ministers. One of the preachers' mothers was dying, and she asked for Timon to come to her deathbed. And the son is the preacher, and he was, why do you want this? She said, he's a man of the cloth, and he's a good preacher. So the son relented, and Timon was with this woman on her deathbed and stayed with her, and he writes in the Baron's Memoirs that, she died peacefully, going to heaven. Not known if he had converted her or not, but this was the power of Timon, that he wanted, that other people, non-Catholics, wanted to be around Timon. Timon was a zealous missionary. There's in northern Arkansas, the Quapaw Indians, and he and a couple of Vincentians had gone down there to minister to them. Through a translator, Timon explains the Catholic faith to them, what it's all about, and celebrates Mass, and then afterwards the Indians explain to Timon and the Vincentians what their religious faith is about. So Timon doesn't condemn them or call them pagans or anything. What he does is very nicely say, these aspects of your faith are very relevant to Catholicism. You call what you call the Great Spirit, we call God the Father. And Pentecost, that is a great feast meant for all men, not for a select few. So he had already established a good missionary presence within the Native American community. Timon was one of the early proponents for women's rights. He spoke out for women's issues and women's rights in the Mississippi Valley. He did not like that people were treated terribly. Now, the Vincentians had slaves, and this was common practice for many religious orders. But he always made sure that the slaves that the Vincentians had in Perrysville, Missouri, were treated very humanely, very fairly. Timon's gaining further reputation for the good work he's doing, for solidifying the presence of the Vincentians in America. Probably the thing that helps him the most is that one of his trips, he's given 200,000 francs for missionary activities in the Mississippi Valley. Now, because he is such an astute businessman, he knew not to put the money in the US bank. He put it instead into the Bank of Missouri, and people said, you're going to lose your money. However, the US bank failed one of the annual collapses, economic collapses. So the $200,000 francs were saved. Now, Timon wasn't also afraid to go after authority. The Vincentians in Paris looked down upon the American Vincentians. And he wasn't afraid to do battle with his superior general. He often said, you give money to places that don't need it, we need it, and you won't give it to us. The response was, we'll continue to do the way we're going to do. So John Timon had to fend for himself. However, this gained him a good reputation within American Catholic circles, within American business circles. Here's a man who knows what to do, and if you're going to push him, he will push back. Timon knew that his time was going to run up, that eventually he was going to have to be a bishop somewhere. His name kept popping up. There was always rumors about, we need him here, it'd be a great bishop. And he had turned down a lot of situations for reasons that are really unclear. He's the American Vincentian Superior General, so that may have been a nice little gift to have, as opposed to having to run a diocese or be the number 2 person. He's the number 1 person. In 1847, April of 1847, 3 new dioceses are created in America: Cleveland, Buffalo, and Albany. Timon was supposed to go to Cleveland, or at least that's the rumor, but Bishop Kenrick intervenes and says, you need to take Buffalo, because if you get Cleveland, you're probably going to get transferred to Louisville, Kentucky. And he doesn't want to go to Louisville, because he knows, as well as everybody else knows, there's a civil war is on the horizon, and Timon is a strict abolitionist. Timon eventually comes to Buffalo. Dr. Castillo will talk about that in a moment. But what we need to take away about who John Timon is, John Timon loved America. He was American first. He was a great organizer, great business administrator, great financial administrator. He was a fundraiser. And let's face it, money talks. Timon was able to raise funds. He got the Vincentians organized. He got the seminary to be one of the preeminent seminaries in America, so much so that places like Philly, Cincinnati, New York wanted Vincentians to staff their seminaries. So Timon is setting a model for American Catholicism. These traits, these missionary activities, these traits of his business skills and activities, will be transferable to Buffalo, and we get the benefit, the blessings of Timon. The one last thing I just want to take away, this is something, I've done a lot of reading and research on Timon, and the one thing that really always got to me, as Timon said, at a time of the American church being persecuted because you're Catholic and not really truly an American, later in life he would say there should be no hyphen in the words American Catholic. I hope that you've gotten a little bit of a better inkling as to who John Timon is and how effective he is for Buffalo, because this guy was already doing great things before he came to Buffalo. So, thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dennis Castillo, and I have served the seminary as professor of church history since the year 2000. After arriving in East Aurora, I became aware of an unpublished manuscript on the life of Bishop Timon. Dr. Leonard Riforgiato, a Buffalo native who taught at Penn State Shenango campus, had died in 1999 at the age of 59. His father, grieving at the loss of his son, wanted so much to have Leonard's research published. After some editing work, I was blessed to be able to put the published work in his hands before he himself passed away. For those wishing to learn more about Timon, I recommend this book, The Life and Times of John Timon, the first Bishop of Buffalo. It's also available in the Buffalo Public Library, in the Grosvenor Room, and we have it in the library as well. As we've heard from Dr. Lubienecki's presentation, John Timon was a hot commodity in the American Catholic community in the early 19th century. The bishops of New York, Vincennes, and St. Louis all wanted him to be their coadjutor bishop, an assistant bishop with right of succession. Timon turned them down. I remember when Bishop Kimmick came, he always liked to tell the story that, well, I was in Nashville, I was happy in Nashville, I thought I'd retired in Nashville. But the Pope calls and says, I want you to be bishop.
Well, who tells the Pope no? Well, Timon did 3 times. Okay. But when the Diocese of Buffalo was created in 1847 by Pope Pius IX, he agreed. Why? Well, some speculation is that in Buffalo, he would not be an assistant. He would be the man in charge. And so as a type A or maybe AA, AAA, I don't know, personality, that worked. Also, I think very significantly, he'd be starting from scratch, which appealed to his missionary character, to build out of nothing. The newest diocese at the time of its creation was the 20 westernmost counties of New York, including Rochester. In this vast territory, there were just 46,000 Catholics in 16 parishes, served by 16 priests, along with 4 schools and 1 orphanage. From his first day in Buffalo, Bishop Timon planned to establish Catholic charitable agencies to meet the city's most pressing social needs. Adequate medical care appeared to be the most urgent of these, as Buffalo did not have a hospital, and Timon was determined to provide one. The Buffalo medical community had been debating for years on whether to establish a hospital. Doctors at the UB Medical School were advocates of what was then the radical idea that in order to learn how to be a doctor, you may want to see a sick person or two. This was called the clinical approach, but for the most of the time, you're basically reading textbooks, listening to lectures, and then actually seeing a sick person when you established your practice. And your practice was for folks who could pay. Okay, the poor would go to the county, actually I almost said county pest house, that's what it was known as. The county poorhouse was pretty much where you were left with. So a hospital was not just simply to care for those who were sick, mainly it was to care for those who were poor and sick. Unfortunately, most of the Buffalo medical community opposed the hospital because they saw it as cutting into their practices. And so what Timon did when he showed up and saw that there was no hospital, he left the doctors to squabble and recruited 6 Sisters of Charity from Baltimore, 3 for a hospital and 3 for a projected orphanage. And these nuns, within a matter of a few weeks, got a hospital up and running. Meanwhile, the doctors are still arguing. On July 8, 1848, the Sisters of Charity moved in and began Sisters Hospital. In accord with his idea of a partnership between church and state and social services, Timon announced that the hospital would be open to those of all faiths and incomes, and it would be run in a non-sectarian manner, that there would be no attempt to proselytize patients, and that clergymen of all faiths could visit and minister to its patients. He also created a medical board to direct medical services. Timon then arranged for the University of Buffalo Medical School to use the facility as a clinical teaching hospital, thus bringing the medical community, the university, the hospital, and the diocese into close alliance. This arrangement was helpful when seeking public support. In 1849, Timon incorporated the hospital, vesting its title in a new hospital board consisting of himself, his vicar general, and 5 Catholic laymen, with provision to transfer complete control of the Sisters of Charity by 1855. Because of how Timon had organized the hospital, it was able to obtain state funds, which of course then allows him to move on to the next project. The opening of Sisters Hospital was providential, since in 1849, Buffalo suffered a second outbreak of cholera. Mortality had been high in the 1832 cholera epidemic due to the lack of a hospital. Thanks to Sisters Hospital, the mortality rate of victims dropped from the 52% experienced at the city's temporary cholera facility to 38%, saving many lives. Bishop Timon had another dream, to provide a school for deaf-mute children, a group that was often ignored. He persuaded the St. Louis community of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet to come to Buffalo. They arrived in 1857, thus beginning St. Mary's School for the Deaf. Once again, Timon applied an ecclesiastical solution to a community need and was able to obtain state funds to assist the school. There were many orphans after the 1849 cholera epidemic, so Timon turned his attention next to their needs. He increased the number of orphanages in the diocese to 3, 1 for girls and 2 for boys. Of the male institutions, one was an orphanage proper, and the other was a protectory, a school for troubled boys, where equipment was installed so they could learn a trade. In 1856, they were moved to the Limestone Hill area, then a part of West Seneca. These would be the foundation upon which Father Nelson Baker would build Our Lady of Victory services. A major obstacle in Timon's efforts to provide badly needed social services was ethnic divisions in the Catholic community. The most serious problem he faced in this regard was trusteeism at St. Louis Church in Buffalo. Trusteeism was the attempt of lay people to operate a parish independent of the local bishop. St. Louis was controlled by German parishioners who did not want any Irish at their parish, including the bishop. When he showed up, they said, "What are you doing here?" "I don't know, I thought I'd move in. I'm the new bishop." "Well, you know, St. Patrick's down there on Broadway, you know, you might want that." So he went. They needed him more than the other folks. Compared to other immigrant groups, the St. Louis community was relatively affluent. See, of all the main immigrant groups that come to the United States, the Germans didn't come for poverty. They came because of political reasons. So they came with capital. And what they wanted to do with their resources was to devote it to beautifying the church. They didn't want to contribute to social services that didn't benefit their people. On the subject of orphanages, for example, they claimed that, quote, "none of our people need them, so why should they contribute?" Timon opposed this separatist view. He believed that everyone was our people. Timon claimed that as bishop, he was the father of all Catholics in his diocese and was thus compelled to care for all. He believed that wealthier congregations should support the bishop's charitable efforts to benefit the entire community. Where St. Louis saw a second tower, he saw an orphanage. It was not until 1856 that the conflict was finally resolved. Like his strategy in social services, Timon's educational policy focused on what the community needed most. As a result, Timon did not devote much effort in building parochial schools. If there was no anti-Catholic materials in the public school curriculum, he would not establish a parochial school. He would not prevent the community from doing so, but he would not devote diocesan resources to this. Instead, Timon concentrated his efforts on higher education. In 1847, Buffalo had only one high school and one college, and that college really was, in fact, a medical school. Timon recruited numerous religious orders with expertise in education. These included the Daughters of the Heart of Mary, the Grey Nuns of the Sacred Heart, the Society of Jesus, the Franciscans, and the Christian Brothers. They established St. Bonaventure University, Niagara University, Canisius College and High School, Narden Academy, Holy Angels, and St. Joseph's Collegiate Institute. 2 seminaries were also founded. The Seminary of Our Lady of the Angels was founded by the Vincentians as part of Niagara University. Today's Christ the King Seminary was originally St. Bonaventure College and Seminary, founded in Allegheny, New York. It was the product of the collaboration of Bishop Timon, a wealthy layman named Nicholas Devereux, and 4 Italian Franciscans. Timon partnered with Devereux. Devereux was an example of benefactors who, through their generosity, has helped the seminary. Tomorrow we will be celebrating a funeral for Mr. Jerry Castillo, another such friend of the seminary who has also gone to his reward. Let me say a few words about this seminary, founded by Timon. First, Timon, the friars, and Devereux set up St. Francis Missionary and Benevolent Society in 1855. They were so excited. We got this all together. We formed a group. Now what? Well, let's build a building. You know, when in doubt, build a building. So construction soon began on a building for the society, but there was no decision yet on what the purpose would be. At an 1857 meeting of the trustees, Timon made the motion that we use it for a school. By the way, if you're ever curious why St. Bonaventure and the seminary have different dates, we take the little note in the minutes for our founding date, and Bonaventure uses a different one. So we moved that it be used for school. Classes at the new St. Bonaventure College and Seminary began in 1859. Commencement for its first graduating class at 28 took place in 1864. The bishop gave oral exams to make sure that his investment was paying off. So we have exams in May if you're interested. If I may, I'd like to share a story of how Christ the King got its name. You have the liturgy police will say, well, wait, how could you possibly be called Christ the King? You were founded in 1850s. The feast wasn't declared until 25. Well, the first building, that wonderful first building that was constructed, housed the seminary. On May 5th, 1930, the campus experienced what one Franciscan later described as a visit by Sister Fire. The fire completely destroyed the first building on campus, which housed the church, monastery, and seminary. The loss of the original building of the school was a hard blow, so instead of simply replacing it, the friars decided that it should not only be a beautiful building, but that the seminary should have its own name. In 1932, during an audience with Pope Pius XI, the rector, Father Thomas Plassman, actually we have his picture right over there, asked if the Pope would like to suggest a name. Pius XI replied, quote, "Call it the Seminary of Christ the King. I know of no more appropriate name for a school where men are trained for the holy priesthood, for the priests are the leaders in the great army of Christ the King." I mean, it's a little militaristic, but this is kind of based on his idea of Catholic action, which is actually a very good thing, more like a grassroots kind of thing. Now, Timon's achievement in the field of education alone was unparalleled among Catholic bishops of the time. When only 1/3 of American dioceses had a seminary at the time, Buffalo had 2. Other dioceses averaged 1 Catholic college in their territory, but by 1870, Buffalo had 3. So the frontier dioceses became much better resourced than many far more established churches. From the moment he arrived in Buffalo, Timon had also determined that he would erect there a building so grand, so noble as his cathedral, so central to the city, that all, including Protestants, would have to acknowledge the legitimacy and equality of the Catholic Church in Buffalo. Bishop Timon selected St. Joseph to be the patron of the diocese and dedicated the new cathedral to him. St. Joseph, as we know, was a man who did not have much, a poor man who gave all that he had to provide for the Holy Family. A good provider, Joseph saw that his family had everything they needed despite his limited means. While Timon was inspired by St. Vincent de Paul, he was also very much another St. Joseph in providing for the diocesan family entrusted to his care. Timon wanted the cathedral to demonstrate that Catholics were a part of the community. Therefore, it was located downtown as a neighbor to St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral. Unlike St. Patrick's in New York, which the bishop at that time, Hughes, wanted his to be out on its own. Here, we wanted to be neighbors. The cost was $150,000, and in 1849, Timon went to Europe to gather funds and furnishings for the projected building. As Dr. Lubienecki pointed out, Timon was a well-known American bishop in Europe. He collected $14,000 in seed money, including $2,000 from Pope Pius IX. He had the cheek to ask the Pope directly and the brains to ask in the presence of cardinals. So after he forked over, well, are you going to help? To this now, there is a wonderful story that during this European fundraising trip, he attended an art exposition in Munich. King Ludwig of Bavaria was proud to show him 3 stained glass windows that he had commissioned for the event. Timon boldly asked Ludwig that, those windows would look great in my new cathedral. Startled by, now, Ludwig thought he was laughing, was ist das? But startled by the bishop's directness, the king agreed to donate them. They are still there today in all their glory behind the main altar, and this Sunday when we have the memorial mass for Timon, they'll be looking down from there. Timon hired the Brooklyn architect Patrick Charles Keeley to design the cathedral. It was to be 200 feet in length, 100 feet wide at the transepts, with a tower rising 202 feet. When the cost of acquiring the property is added, the total sum was $180,000 at a time when a family could live comfortably on $200 a year. When work had to be halted for lack of funds, Timon issued a public appeal. Many Protestants, including Millard Fillmore, then President of the United States, made donations. The campaign was also supplemented by a fundraising drive in Mexico, which netted another $4,000. Keep that in mind next month for World Mission Sunday. I know, we in the United States, we always get hit up for a collection and such, but there was a time when the good people of Mexico raised money to help those poor Americans up north. Considering Timon's zeal for helping others, it's not surprising that the first use of the cathedral was as a homeless shelter. When several homes on the shores of Lake Erie were destroyed by a storm, Timon turned the still unfinished cathedral into a shelter where the victims could pitch their tents. Thus, even before it was completed, St. Joseph's Cathedral served Timon's intent to associate church and community. On July 1st, 1855, only 4 years after the construction had begun, St. Joseph's Cathedral, though incomplete within and still lacking its organ and its Munich windows, was dedicated. 14 bishops, assisted by 100 bishops, took part in the ceremony. 3,000 filled the church. After the organ and sanctuary windows were finally installed, Timon began public sacred concerts in St. Joseph's, which were well attended by the city's Protestant cultural elite. The bishop himself also delivered public lectures inside the confines. In this way, he made the cathedral central to the social and cultural life of the city. In 1865, Timon gave last rites to a sister of charity who was dying from an infection which Timon himself caught as he was doing his pastoral work. Timon doesn't die from this, but the infection, along with his arduous work schedule, really led his health into decline. His last public service was Palm Sunday, 1867. He then immediately had a serious collapse. They knew he wasn't going to recover. They telegraphed the bishops in Hamilton, Toronto, and they came to administer last rites, and then he passed away. Now, at his funeral procession, which was 3 miles long, you had an enormous crowd showed up. The crowd estimate was actually larger than the actual city of Buffalo at the time, so people from far and wide came. And he was eulogized by the press, calling him a great and good man, and saying that people of all creeds were going to be honoring and deserved to give honor to this great Catholic leader. Now, at his funeral, the homilist was Archbishop Kenrick of St. Louis. And Kenrick said, he told the congregation that John Timon was still speaking to them. He spoke to them in this cathedral that he had built, and he was speaking to them in the many social service agencies he had established. And so in following and responding to Archbishop Kenrick's words, that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of the day. We're going to listen to John Timon. We're going to listen to his legacy through the words of those who are continuing his work. So we're going to have a bit of a break. Then when we come back, we'll be having representatives of Sisters Hospital, St. Mary's School for the Deaf, Narden Academy, Niagara University, Baker Victory Services, institutions that continue his legacy of service today. And in this way, Timon is going to be speaking with us today. I kind of imagine him in spirit out there too, you know, listening as well to these words. I will say though too that one of the blessings of organizing this conference has been in meeting with the various men and women who are continuing Timon's legacy. You can see that his zeal for helping others continues to this day, and I think we're all blessed by their work. Now, as again, we're gonna take a break. We have refreshments over to the left. To my right, we have displays of various agencies, organizations founded by Bishop Timon. Actually, one of the testaments to Timon's great work is we can't have everybody up here. It would just be too long of a day. And so we have displays from some of the institutions that you'll not be hearing from also displayed as well. And as a little pitch, there are copies of Bishop Timon's memoirs or history, depending, as Paul mentioned. You know, actually, as far as he was concerned, writing the history of the founding of Buffalo is by his history. So there's his history of the missions of Western New York there. So please feel free to take one. We're accepting free will offering. The foreword is by Bishop Malone, and so maybe you can get him to autograph it as well. So thank you. We'll take a break now. Again, enjoy some refreshments, enjoy looking at the displays, and then I'll call you back for the next speaker. Thank you.